Welcome to our panel. We are covering EMEA and the US and some global stuff as well. I want to go over some housekeeping notes to get us started. Please, all attendees, please mute without video. If you have any questions, please put them in. The Q&A will be disabled, the chat will be disabled, and we will follow up with questions at the end. The session is being recorded so that we can play this for you, and we'll post it on the TAM site as well as we will post it on LinkedIn so you can check this out later. Let me start by introducing our fantastic panel that we have here today. At my side, I have Billy Boss, who is our co-moderator. And on the panel, I am Ann Blythe with Deal Captains, and thank you, Deal Captains, for sponsoring this panel today. On the panel, we have Mike McCormick from Travel Again, Charlie Mitchell with Deal Captains, the CTO from Deal Captains, Valia Cox, who is our Travel and Expense Manager from SWBC, Clive Ratton, who is he is the CEO of the BTA in EMEA. Nigel Parkinson is our Senior Vice President of Altour Travel. Beth Toffel is with Footprint ID, and Leah Valia is our Travel Director, Vice President of Focus Relocation, and Daniel Price, who is the founder and CEO of Journey. So let me get started by talking a little bit. We're going to be covering what's happening now with EMEA's legislations and US legislations, and kind of what are the solutions? Where are we going with this? It's an open forum, and we'll kind of interject with topics that are relevant. This is real time conversation. So let's start with Clive. Clive, can you kind of start us off with what's going on with EMEA right now and their legislations?
Sure, thanks, Anne, and good afternoon or good morning, everyone. Trust you're well. Welcome from just outside London. Yeah, what's going on in here in the UK? Really kind of a critical phase in the reopening of travel from a UK perspective right now. Many of you will be aware of the UK's government have a global travel task force, which announced their findings at the end of April, and the real keynote is of the opening of international travel, hopefully on the 17th of May, which sounds great, but there's an awful lot of work to be done. And over this next couple of weeks, some intense lobbying with government here in the UK to make sure that when travel does open up, firstly, that it does, and secondly, what travellers will need to do. It is a critical time, obviously, for us to get people back travelling again. The key takeouts as to where we are now: it is still illegal for people to travel ex the UK, and for the majority of countries to travel into the UK. That will change on the 17th of May if that gets approved by the government. We are expecting the announcement of the countries that we will be allowed to travel to on the 7th of May, so just over a week away. When it opens, we have a criteria, what is called here in the UK, a traffic light criteria, countries that are red, countries that are amber, and countries that are green. And it is the colour lottery. We don't know which ones will be in which at the present time. We hope as many as possible are in green, because that's not only what our industry, the travel management industry, requires, but equally the aviation and hotels, and of course the UK economy and US economy needs to see people travelling again. In green from the UK, you will just need to have a PCR test before departure and a PCR test 2 days after arrival back into the United Kingdom. That is then also, you may require tests to arrive in a country because they choose to ask that you have one. So it could be 3 or 4 tests that you need to get through that. Our argument right now is if it's green, it should be green, that you should be able to fly there and back without the need for anything other than a lateral flow test. And if you get a positive lateral flow test on the inbound, you move up to a PCR test. So you remove as many barriers as possible. Right now, there are those barriers in. In amber, you will need to quarantine for 10 days if it's an amber country, and take a test on before you go, a test on day 2, and a test on day 8. You can take a additional test on day 5 and release if it's negative. So some real barriers against travel still, even in amber And in red, if you go to a red country and therefore return from a red country, you will need to hotel quarantine for 10 days at a cost of just over £1,700. So pretty much stopping anybody traveling on that point. So we've still got a lot of hurdles to go through here in the UK. For those that are not based in the UK, very much like you guys in the US, our vaccination program has been fantastic. We're over half the population vaccinated, but still we have a government that here in the UK that is absolutely risk adverse and leading health caution. We're really pushing the government to move from that, but they're still being very much led by the science. We also have a situation here in the UK, and I don't know what it's like in the US, but the public perception right now is still very much anti-travel and wanting borders to be closed. So it is a really fine balance we've got in terms of pushing forward the government to let us travel against a public perception of still being fairly frightened about opening up our borders. The traffic light system is great. It has actually already shown that it can work with the tragic events that are going on in India. India was added to the red list to stop people coming in from that country and bringing the virus here, and allows for the flights that are going to India to importantly just concentrate on taking aid in any way that the UK can absolutely help. But it just demonstrates the process that we support as an industry over here. The traffic lights do work. But we also need warning when countries are going from green to amber and amber to red and the other way. And that is another real concern for our travellers, that if you go out somewhere that is in green and it suddenly goes into amber with a snap of a finger, then you're stuck with 10 days quarantine when you get home. So that is something that the government have watched, and they are having what they call a amber watch list, which will give warning as to when a country is drifting towards amber, and hopefully give enough time for people to make a decision either if they go or not, or if they're in a green country that is turning amber, to head home before flights are stopped or quarantine is required. So that's the kind of picture here in the UK from a perspective of what the travel is. Still a lot of unknowns, still a lot of concerns, but we are moving forward and there is some positivity. Only yesterday, the government announced that the National Health Service app will be used as our travel passport. So I have had my first vaccination, and on my app on my phone, I have it registered that I have my first vaccine. That will be what we will use, which is great. However, who knows when you turn up at JFK if the US government are going to accept that. And it's one of the big issues that we're pushing the government is we need international recognizable standards. Otherwise, we're going nowhere. And that is really, really important. We back the IATA Health Pass. I know Common Pass and Verify and all of those are out there. We need the international governments to work out that there are 3 or 4 apps maximum that we can use that are globally recognized, and we need to recognize what testings are authorized and what vaccines are authorized and all of that. So another hurdle. I just want to cover up on the US because it's clearly what we're talking about today. We are absolutely passionate here in the UK to get the US open, and our 2 great nations traveling to see each other again, not only for business, but for holidays and VFR. And, it's just been our lives is traveling back and forward across the pond. We understand US may well fall on the green list here in the UK. I talk to government quite a lot, and my feeling is it won't be from the 17th of May. It will be from the middle of June. But we know there are a number of things like an executive order needs overturned in the US and a couple of other things. So we need to work together transatlantic to make that happen. And I think you've probably heard enough from me because I go on for ages around it. It's just to say the UK is in a good position from a vaccine. It's in an okay position from travel, and it's in a bit of a difficult position with public perception. So those 3 things, we need to get them all together and get us back on aeroplanes and flying and doing business again. Thanks.
So, Clyde, that's fantastic. You just reiterated the very importance of having this panel, because the reality is I don't know that a lot of people realize the level of EMEA in UK right now. I don't mean to get off track, but I do want to, before we chat with Mike, I want to ask you a really quick question. I know there's been conversations that the airlines are going around their policies and what they're doing with their fares to get around sort of the legislations of travel in EMEA and the UK. Is that the case? Are you seeing that?
I mean, if you mean that airlines are being really flexible on their fares around refunds and changes, lots of that is making it as flexible as possible to give confidence to a traveller that if they try to head somewhere and something goes wrong, they're not going to lose out from in their pocket, as it were. I mean, there's not too many other ways around. You can't get back in the country. People are not flying any way that they shouldn't be able to fly. They're getting picked up, albeit that here we've got horrendous issues on arrivals at borders because they're understaffed. So airlines are frustrated. But the answer is that airlines are doing everything they can, clearly, to encourage people to travel, but have to also be aware of government policy and public perception, and those two things make it quite difficult. But the great thing is the industry is working so closely together here in the UK to find every way possible and make it as easy and frictionless as possible when travel can happen.
And that's a great topic, and we'll get back to that when we talk with Beth about duty of care and wellness. But I do want to pass it on to Mike to kind of reflect what Clive has said from the US legislations and updates as to where we're at now and moving forward with the initiatives of a global health pass.
Well, I mean, yeah, thanks, Ann. I mean, first off, Clive, I think you did a terrific job of kind of summarizing the state of affairs of where we are and certainly where you are in the UK. And I think it just points to the fact of, the commonality of the issues, right? This is a global challenge, global problem. We're a global industry, and the things that all the elements you're talking about, everything from, the digital health, verification to, the policies to, just the need for the kind of a red, yellow, green and kind of having standardized ways that we all address it. Is just absolutely critical, and we keep coming back to it. We keep talking about it over and over again, and we're finally, I think we're breaking through. We're definitely being heard. Now it's turning that into action, right? And I think you're honed in on a few really critical points in terms of some milestones that are coming up here. If we can get through them, and I think if again, if the UK is leading the way in terms of the red, yellow, green process, and really trying to have a better job, doing a much better job of communicating. Like we said, we need that as an industry to be. We can't be reacting all the time. We have to be in concert or be working together to do this. The other point you made is dead on, which is the government still is rooted very much in policies that were created, a year ago under very different conditions. And now that people are being vaccinated, and like in the UK, you said you're hitting 50%. We'll be there in the US before long. I mean, I think we're at 46% of people at least have received one shot, right? And some, have had, are fully vaccinated. That number will keep climbing, but we're also going to we're also hitting that inflection point where we're hitting challenges. We're going to hit the other kinds of challenges, which is getting enough people of that remainder to get vaccinated. So we have those issues. But when it comes to traveling, the policies and the communication have not been adapted to fit people who have been vaccinated versus those that aren't. And it gets caught up in this discussion about, not that somehow you're going to discriminate against people who aren't vaccinated, or that all the other political type discussions that are happening and debates that are happening that really have nothing to do with this. This is about, it's just a matter of really having clear understanding of what are your procedures, what are your conditions, and then even back to the use of quarantines, they largely don't work in the current state we're in of the pandemic. For one, they only work as a way to initially, when you first have an outbreak, it's a way to basically hold while the health officials actually figure out what's going on and what the root cause is and what strain you're actually dealing with. Yes, you can there is a need, but after you get to a certain point, quarantining provides little or no value, right? And we're at that point. So now it just becomes policies that were set up for earlier stages of the pandemic that, again, have not been adjusted. And what we're pushing for here too is really an environment where, like now, where we're saying, look, make it fact-based, make it metric-based, but when you hit certain thresholds in terms of vaccination, when you hit certain thresholds in terms of, the state of your affairs in general, let's use that as a trigger to change policy. And the policies have been lagging. And again, I think I think what we're getting to now, we've reached that point where we're being heard, the discussions are being had, and slowly policies are coming and changing. And, you know, here in the US, the CDC is finally making those steps to say, you know, travel is safe if you've been vaccinated, and making those, you know, conditions known. But we still have a long way to go to get international travel open again. I would say very hopeful that the UK will actually lead the effort to signal to the US about having that corridor open up. And maybe this becomes kind of the first real, you know, other than the work that's been done between like here and Rome, for example, somewhat, some in Italy, but if we can get a major corridor opening up and working safely and prove out that it doesn't, we're not going to have a new outbreak as a result, that we can manage the, you know, travel experience and do it in a way that is safe, then I think that will be a major milestone and a signal to opening up, starting to open up more of the world.
So Mike, let me quickly ask you a quick question. Do you think the US is going to meet that mid-June that Clive talked about date?
I think there's a lot of pressure, not just industry pressure, but just general business pressure to make that happen.
Okay.
So, and I think it, because again, we're also getting to a point with business travel, like we said, where, you know, companies are turning their eye towards the fall, towards reopening offices, to starting businesses again. I know as travel buyers, you're all having those internal company discussions about how do I do that? You know, how do we begin as a company to open up again for business travel? That's going to put a tremendous amount of pressure on the government to do something, right?
Okay, great.
Because you can't, business doesn't work without travel.
Mike, real quick, what do you foresee us being in the US copying a lot of the policies that the UK is putting in place, or how do you see that formulating?
Well, see, it's already started because the State Department came out with new guidance. It's a little muddy, but it's a first attempt of incorporating the health standards into the merging with the previous kind of terrorism risk standards and creating kind of a modified version of a red, yellow, green. So they released that, and they've started that process. Look, it doesn't matter if over time, hopefully we'll get to even a more common way that we're doing this globally. But even for now, just the fact that everyone's that US has started that, UK started that, we're starting to see it happen in other places. And the messaging, again, what we're hearing back, we're as an industry doing a much better job of delivering the same messaging everywhere too, which is good, is very helpful, because it forces that uniformity. But yeah, I mean, I'm fairly optimistic. We could see a breakthrough come June.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike.
Great.
I appreciate that.
So Mike, this kind of flows into talking with Beth about, especially the topic is for buyers, are my travelers going to get stuck? And between Clive and Mike and their conversation and duty of care and the wellness, you can kind of hit on some of the things that are happening now for duty of care and wellness and that topic of being stuck.
Well, I think that as both Mike and Clive mentioned, one of the big pieces for the traveler and getting them back on the road from their perspective is the fear of traveling, and what's in, and what will be in place from their companies to protect them should they have any type of issue, be stuck, or quarantine, or get sick, or whatever it may be wherever they are. So what we need to do is provide tools that help address that fear for the traveler, to help get them willing to and excited to go back and travel and business travel. And then, of course, the other side of it is the action on the part of the company that they will provide, helping find a doctor, helping to do whatever it takes to protect their employees should they experience any type of event when they are out of the country or domestically traveling. So I think what we're seeing is the first piece of this is to help address that fear. Who's going to pay for the challenge, for whatever needs exist if someone should get stuck? How do we how do we kind of create that comfort level for the traveler again? One of the things that that we look at is obviously helping to make sure that people travel and have their health and medical information with them wherever they are, should they experience any type of health event. I think that one of the things we also have discussed amongst us previously is that it is about COVID, but this is also about adapting our duty of care and the tools to any type of future disruptive events and health events. That COVID is the impetus for getting us all to focus and think about this. And it brings it to the forefront, and also then adapt to the changing business travel world. So I think that there are a lot of components, but the first one from my perspective is providing a very identifiable and complete set of tools that help bring the traveler confidence back.
Excellent. And you rolled right into our next panelist, Charlie, who is the expert at all tools and technology. So Charlie, can you hit on some of these new tools and technology that are helping cope with all of these changes?
Certainly, yeah. I think we can really focus on the trends that we're seeing to improve the traveler confidence. And I think we've already covered some of them, from the vaccine passports to some of the information around traveler tracking. I know we covered a little bit last time, but just to reiterate how much pre-trip approval is going to be changing from, I think, what we've traditionally seen as a post-booking tool or mechanism to allow travel to happen, to now more of a pre-tool, more of that request style feature that we're seeing come through more of the providers. And I think it's an important change because it's going to give almost the traveler a sense of their own pre-trip approval. It's almost this bizarro world of now they have the power to say, yes, I'm comfortable or not going to this location for the next 6 months to a year. And I think that really empowers them to have the ability to say, do I want to go to this location or not? So I think we're going to see that start to trickle through a lot of the tools and technology that the TMC and the OBTs are offering. So we've got our eyes on that, but also when it comes to just the information kind of reservoir of where that information comes from and how we message to those travelers when and effectively, and who that comes through. I think that is going to start to play itself out a little more clearly here, whether it comes from a third-party message provider or whether that's going to rely on the TMC shoulders. And I think it's going to change how that service is provided by the TMCs to inform travelers where they can and can't go. So I think we're going to see different changes in how those communication things come across to the travelers. I know we've kind of always shied away from being too intrusive on communication things, and it's always kind of lived on that fringe of, you know, we'll inform them a little bit in the booking tools, we'll inform them a little bit on the TMC entry points and their portals. But I think now we're going to really start to see a new level of interaction through AI and through chat type technologies, that travelers are able to interact with themselves and say, hey, what's the conditions like if I go to, you know, the UK? What's the digital vaccine passport look like if I go to New York? And what are those differences? And the more we can make sure those systems are integrated right from the get-go, I think we're going to see a much better experience coming out of this. And I still reiterate, from a technology standpoint, we are at such an amazing time to have kind of a fresh start and a fresh palette to reintroduce all these technologies to flow together in ways that we haven't seen before. So we're really excited on what that's going to look like. And I think all those are going to help the traveler have confidence and give them the ability to be informed, I think, be engaged in ways that we haven't seen previously.
So Charlie, let me ask you, with the technology, there's a ton of it coming out now. And already since COVID, we've seen new technology that has come and gone within a year and a half. So how are you selecting these tools that are actually going to make a difference on a global level, especially with the duty of care? How are you vetting some of this technology?
Well, certainly the market will have to look and I think vet themselves kind of what's going to be the winners and losers as things change and adapt. I think what kind of we're focused on is, I think, what's really going to be setting itself up for the long term. And I think what's really opening itself up to really more of an API style, I think, approach to how they integrate with other providers. And I think people that don't kind of allow themselves to be able to integrate easily with other tools aren't setting them up in the long run for success in the current environment. I think there's so much emphasis right now being placed on companies being able to either make their own technology or partner with the right providers, and right now there's this kind of this big trend of acquisitions happening at the moment. And I think that's also going to play out into what these ecosystems basically look like, if they're going to take a very open approach or a very closed approach to how they adapt technology. And I think that's how the market's really going to decide kind of these winners and losers for next year, is kind of who has the ability to be open and who has the ability to be closed, and kind of which one the companies themselves are going to be more comfortable playing in that framework. But for me, kind of a more open API infrastructure is always going to have more advantages to be more nimble and more adaptive, as kind of we see more changes coming from things like the vaccine passports, and be able to say, hey, here's a new thing, let's adapt it really quickly and make sure our travelers are able to take advantage.
Great. And Charlie, you mentioned something, the speed of adaptability, and that's where I move into our buyers now. Let me start with Leah. You are a global boutique executive focused relocation, so it's really key that you have these abilities to do this. So let me ask you, are you as a TMC, or I'm sorry, as your company, are you taking on this technology within your company, or are you relying on your suppliers or your TMCs to do this for you? And kind of what's your perspective, what you're dealing with now and what you need in the future?
Sure. So yeah, absolutely. We rely on our service partners for that type of technology. And certainly as it became evident that relocating people and their belongings was going to be a challenge because you had to socially distance, it really created a challenge. For example, moving household goods. You physically have to have people come and pack and load your belongings, move them to a new location. And people are also expecting to have contact with agents and destination service providers to help them find housing and to help in their school search. So, we reached out to our service partners and said, what ways are you guys going to be able to service our employees, the ones that are willing to move, in a safe but still high touch way? And all of our service partners very quickly came up with innovative ways to do things. So for example, our household goods move providers immediately moved to virtual surveys, as opposed to in-home surveys, as well as the real estate market. The agents came up with apps that allowed them to provide virtual tours, either while they were in a home and showing a home virtually to someone looking to rent that home, and virtual surveys while they were driving in a car ahead of that potential candidate, to show them an area that they were looking to move into. So we do rely heavily on our service providers to provide those innovative solutions, that will, to Beth's point, make people feel safe that they are going to be moving into a location and will have the resources in the case that things deteriorate quickly, that they're going to have someone boots on ground that's actually going to be able to help them with that situation.
So quickly, Leah, when you're relocating an executive to EMEA or UK, have you already run into challenges with them trying to get back to the US? So I know you have one trip and then you have to check out their areas, then to get back and go forth. What are the challenges you're dealing with getting your people back?
Certainly, we've had executives stuck. More important, it was a matter of they were on assignment in the US and went home to London for a home leave trip, right? They're entitled to that. They go home for a home leave trip, and all of a sudden everything's shut down. They're now stranded for 3 months. And so if in that situation, they're able to kind of hunker down in that particular location, if it was their own home that they were taking the trip to, then it was just a matter of being able to partner them with our TMC to make sure that they were up to date on the most recent travel restrictions and when they were able to fly back. But that happened in the reverse as well. People that were on assignment that went to another location for just a short-term business travel and were stuck in location. Yeah, that absolutely happened on quite a few occasions. And, you know, the big challenge there is, you know, if they already had housing, then it was just a matter of who was going to pay the bill for that additional housing. And frankly, you know, companies just, they understood the gravity of the situation and what their duty of care was, and they just took care of it. But that wasn't always the case. You know, sometimes someone was on a short-term business travel assignment, and the housing that they had was only secured for a certain period of time. And so the ability to then find different types of housing became the next challenge. So, you know, certainly we've had a myriad of different challenges, but by and large, we've been able to meet all of those challenges with the service partner network that we have in place.
Excellent. And that does bring up another, and thank you, Leah, because you flow into kind of Valia. Your conversation on our last panel was, do you rely on your TMC more for the duty of care and some of the services now? In the future, you're going to rely heavily more on the TMC. Can you talk about a little bit your global travelers now moving from the US to EMEA in those areas?
Well, right now, there is no international travel yet. I think it's going to roll out just like every other company right now. I see a lot of people coming back to work, a lot of people going back to offices. And I think this summer is going to be key, a key indicator of how strong travel is going to come back for 2021. And I definitely see it coming back for 2022, because we have tons of meetings and events already happening for Q3 and Q4 of 2021. So I'm really excited about what's going to happen, what's to come for business travel. You see that many airlines are already starting to open up travel, international travel. And I'm just really excited. We don't have any travel right now planned, but I do see it coming, and it's exciting because everybody is ready to travel. But also, like you mentioned, make sure that everything is fine and good for us to start going out.
And going along with that, even more so now with what you've heard from Clive and Mike right now, are you going to be relying even more so on your TMC for some of the new technology Charlie's talking about? Or are you relying on your own company to pull these in?
No, I definitely think that you need a partner for their duty of care. As much as we would like to know what's going on in the UK, and we wouldn't know. We'd have to have somebody physically there to be telling us what's really happening, because you can read any article and they can give you an estimate, but it's not until you know somebody that's there that you can get a real grasp of what's really going on. So definitely you have to go through your TMC and your duty of care partners.
Hey, Vilia, I got a question real quick for you. The cost situation too involved with all this, of course, it's not relevant in some cases, but we see costs going across the board up in rental cars and in airline tickets and everything like that. What is that factor? How are you implementing that into the overall, your overall plan for recovery?
You know, that's a good question, because it depends on who you talk to. My previous job, it would have been cost would have been the indicator of who can travel. But right now, where I'm at right now, it's a necessity. So cost is something that you have to incur to travel. And when you have a sales team, they are key and they're vital to get out there and make those connections and make those business deals. So when it comes to cost, it is concerning, but sometimes you just don't have a choice and you just got to go.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Valia, we did have a question, and I know this question came up in the last webinar that we had, and I know that as far as I don't think it's a question that you have the ability to answer, but I'll put it out there for the sake of our audience as well. They're asking if your company is requiring vaccines before they travel. So I'll leave it up to you. I know that's something that compliance-wise you may not be able to answer, but I'll throw it out there.
Well, that's a question that, again, it's with each company is different, and it goes to each company. And for myself, I guess we're still not there yet. We're still not there yet. Let me just.
Well,
put it
and
that
I
way.
was
We're
going to
still not there
say, back to policy, right?
Yeah.
This is where if we have policies and communication that allows for distinguishing between vaccinated and non-vaccinated travelers, and you have then in the criteria set, it helps companies in a big way, because it shouldn't be on the companies either
Right.
to
Mhm.
get into some murky kind of
Yeah.
HR ground. And
HIPAA.
I know every company's struggling with this, not just
Yeah.
from a travel perspective, but about what do you do about going back to the office? What standards?
Correct.
And I think as a lot of that gets worked out, the best thing we can do is just have open and clear communication about what it means if you are in either category, and then you follow a set of procedures and we go forward. It's like, hopefully over time, the 50% will become 80%, will be, and we'll be vaccinated in a way like everyone is for every other vaccination that they receive, right? And that will become the standard. But until that case, that's an important part. And I think you're right. It's a very difficult issue for
Mhm.
anybody in your travel management roles, in every capacity. And you can't be dictating that decision, but you can be clear about the implications are in either case.
Yep. Thank you, Mike. Because I was just going to say, we could open up the doors for a whole lot of
Yeah.
messy things with that vaccination and policy. And so thank you for your response. But going from there with this topic, Valia, I'm going to move over to Nigel in the UK. From the TMC perspective, especially in EMEA, you hear the buyers, they're relying more on the TMCs. Are the TMCs able to pivot quickly enough to adapt to these new APIs and changes with technology to provide for the buyers?
Yeah, thank you for that, Anne. And first of all, it was great to hear both Valia and Leah as well say how much they relied on the TMC, and it's a joint relationship, isn't it? So, our numbers look great. US domestic is strong at the moment. And in the UK, we've got a lot of sales activity, a lot of interest. Mainly, it's not turned into kind of hard corporate contracts yet, but we've got a heck of a lot of interest. The kind of sales pipeline has never looked healthier. But you know what? If I could take a step back, if I may, just very quickly, we've done some work with our people internally, and what they've said is this is a pause for thought within our organization. Let's not just assume we're going to go back to doing things the way we've always done them. Is this an opportunity for us to do things differently? I go back, most of my time is spent looking after the sales team and the account management team. And when we went back to the start of this thing, we're thinking, well, we're running a sales team where nobody's buying anything, an account management team, nobody's traveling anywhere. So what exactly are you managing? And then everybody said, well, you've got to communicate. It's okay saying that, but how do you do it? Who do you communicate with? What are you supposed to say? You don't want to be the guy that picks up the phone and says, hey, it's me again. You got to have something to communicate. So we did a fair bit of soul searching, and we, similar to this, we started running webinars. We started talking in a different way to our clients and to our prospects, and found pretty much that we shared many of the same issues that have been highlighted so far in this conversation. So there was a huge amount of anxiety that was out there amongst prospects and customers, because travel managers are getting pressure from all sides. They're getting it from up above, from the C-suite, who are relying on them as the single source of knowledge and expertise in everything related to travel, which is kind of unfair because none of us can claim to be that. The travelers are reliant on them. In the meantime, and then you've got HR coming into the mix, you've got legal coming into the mix. And so the travel manager's kind of been squeezed from, I see some of my friends here are nodding on the line, squeezed from all directions. And so we got into that. We talked to them. I think we've sort of changed the way we interact with our clients. Now, I'd like to think one of the positives that we'll take from COVID is a different, a more honest, in some ways, a more open kind of conversation relationship with our clients and with our prospects. And so we've talked about this anxiety, some of which we talked. I think Beth touched on the wellness side of it as well. We've got into how do you ensure clients, travelers, when they're going. How do you look after people? And and from that, we never went into it with a sales hat on. It was all about thought leadership. But the very kind of welcome side effect is that we've suddenly got a whole bunch of people talking to us that we didn't talk to before. And we're not doing any of the old kind of sales stuff. We're absolutely not doing that. We're just talking to people, and it's great. It seems to be working. You know, as I say, I can't tell you that we've signed up a whole bunch of people, but we're talking to some interesting people. I think we will when things start to recover. I'm extremely optimistic about that. You know, and one of the things, just another example is RFPs. I mean, I would doubt there's anyone listening today or anyone on the panel here that likes RFPs. They're just a pain for everyone involved. And well, this has got us thinking maybe what we can do, and what we're starting to do now is looking at the virtual meetings tech, which we've been really successful in, and sort of retooling that and saying, well, can we do something with an RFP instead of us, you know, filling in a big document and all getting nervous and coming up and doing a presentation? Why don't we actually make it more interactive than that? Set up rooms so it's possibly a longer process, but it allows people to really absorb what you're doing. Use video, use some of this technology, use the interactive stuff, and set up separate rooms with experts in so they can go and talk to people. If you want to talk about technology or duty of care or whatever, data, whatever it is, you can go and talk to those people in your own time rather than sat through a 40-page PowerPoint and, you know, listen to someone presenting. So it's just, you know, it's some of the things we're doing, some of the innovations. We had great success with the hotline that we've introduced as well. And this is something that is as much for our staff as it is for our agents, as it is for our clients. And it is, again, to address the anxiety. It can be, I'm looking at my hotel right now and I see there's a demonstration in the street. What do I do? It could be, I've got a cough and a car, I don't know what to do. And it's just that real basic, simple advice that we need. And as I say, that's not just for clients, that's something our agents can use as well, because of course they're coming into a whole new world as well, where, you know, there's a lot more pressure on those guys. So I guess, and I'm very optimistic. I don't think the recovery is going to be linear, though. I think we're seeing some, I mean, who the heck can make any sense of any of the data at the moment? But I don't think it's going to be a straight recovery. I think we're going to see some possible bumps along the road, but fingers crossed.
Absolutely, that's part of change, you know. So I do have one question from our audience to you, Nigel. And from your perspective at TMC, what are some of the largest concerns you're getting from travel managers or your companies?
So the two conversations, I don't have a conversation about price anymore. That I'm sure I will, but it's not. The two conversations I have are duty of care and everything that flows off the back of that, and increasingly environmental sustainability, which is a really interesting one we're getting into now, working with some partners there, which I know we haven't really touched on so much in this, but you know, it's from sustainability, it's making it practical. You're not trying to, I don't really know how to phrase it. If you've got to take small bites at it, right? So the way we would do it is to say, you know, the amount of carbon you are using here would be equivalent of driving a small car to the moon and back, or is the, you know, kind of everyday examples you can bring in to try and make it fun and motivate people in different ways. But I suppose, I don't know if that answers your question, Anne, but those would be the two headline things that I'm talking about most.
That's interesting, the sustainability. And going in and moving, thank you, Nigel, and appreciate your perspective from your EMEA side and the larger picture. Going into the duty of care, there's an issue I'm not sure if a lot of buyers or companies are reflecting on, is on the ground. And ground transportation now is going to be even more impactful in this day and age than ever. And so I'm going to hand it off. And Daniel, can you kind of give us a perspective of what you're seeing now for ground transportation? And this is the reason why you created your company for this reason.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. It's a really good question, because I think pre-pandemic ground transport wasn't quite as important as rail and maybe even air, hotel, all the other parts of the travel puzzle that you kind of pull together. But since, it's kind of come more to the front because we're doing more localized journeys. You know, there is no international travel, so business travel has become those local journeys. And to give you a perspective, I can only talk about the UK because they're the only kind of figures that I've got. But in the UK, if you were to take a look at where we were just after the pandemic started, our ground transport pretty much ground to a halt as restrictions came in. So you were talking rail and public transport was down anywhere between 5%, maybe 10% of pre-pandemic numbers between March and June of last year, creeping up to around about 30. So where we're at now, we're at around about 40% public transport. but road has recovered relatively well. It's up to 92% of pre-pandemic numbers. So what you're seeing is more personal modes of transport are being used than they ever were for those type of journeys previously. So what's happened, the ground transport operators, so companies like taxis have implemented face masks. In the UK, it's a mandated policy to do this, and they've upped their cleaning regime. So any ground transport company that's still working are talking about how often they're cleaning the vehicles, you know, no front seat passengers. And there are an ability to book a vehicle with a screen. It does leave the question of, but if you can't book, you know, on the platform a vehicle with a screen and there's still a vehicle without a screen, is that safe? Isn't it? There's still these grey areas of guidelines that haven't been put in place for the industry. However, you can now book a vehicle with a screen, and how long that is in place, you know, who knows? Again, we're waiting for these vaccination programs. So the question is, what does it look like in the future? How do we get back to something looking like what we had before, and what role does ground transport play in that future? And with TAMS and in partnership with the University of Exeter, we've been undertaking some research that's going to present itself as a white paper. And, you know, if there are any travel procurement or travel buyers watching, we'd still appreciate your views in answering this survey. However, the early results are showing us, and it really comes to me, I suppose, is no surprise, is there is an inclination as we come out of this for less shared transport. So public transport, buses, trains, ride sharing itself is completely looks to be off the radar. So these type of road vehicles and journeys are being lower prioritized, and more private modes of transport such as car hire, taxis, and the personal car is massively increasing in what travel buyers feel they will allow their users to use more of in the future. And certainly what we're starting to see, certainly around holidays, and I've seen reports of it in the US, is a lack of supply of vehicles, certainly around holiday periods. And if you think about this, this is natural. So companies like Avis, who've probably cut around 2.5 billion in costs against their normal kind of costs in an annual year, that would all be people and vehicle costs. So one of the biggest worries when I speak to operators is when the demand comes back, how do we get back the supply? How do we have vehicle availability, and how do we have drivers available to take them? Because the UK's drivers currently, they're not driving for taxi companies. They're probably driving Amazon parcels or delivering your food. They're not driving passengers around as much as they once were. And one of the concerns we're seeing coming out is there is still this concern from travel buyers and travel managers around the fragmented market within ground transport. And early on, Charlie mentioned about these APIs and plugging into the right platform, and that's what we're doing at Journey. We're building a platform that can plug into any supply chain that a TMC or that a travel buyer wants. So if you have a deal in place with Avis, but you're concerned that they've just shut 60% of their locations, and that's fine. We can use other suppliers to fill the gap where you might feel there's a need for that. So as we move into these new working patterns, and 85% of the travel managers who've responded so far to this survey have said that employees will be given the opportunity to work more from home. So it looks like this is going to be something that forms part of a work policy that you can work from home. The question mark comes is, does this create more work journeys? If I now work from home and I didn't work from home previously, who pays for my journey to get to work, and who makes sure I'm safe on that journey that used to be a commute, but I now only make it 2 or 3 times a month, and contractually that's now a business trip. So who's looking after that? And the question then comes is, if I'm using my own personal car to make that journey, who's managing? Do I have the right insurance in place? Do I have the right certificate for my vehicle? Do I have a driving license? You know, am I allowed to do that journey in my car, or did it expire last week and I forgot? 50% so far of the travelers that we've spoken to, travel buyers, don't have these checks and balances in place to check these journeys with their travelers. So I suppose, and ultimately what we're seeing is that ground transport's just become hugely more important and interesting for the traveler and the travel buyer. and hopefully the TMC as well. But I think what the research is also showing is there's less firm policies in place. Travel managers and TMCs have got great experience in moving people hundreds or thousands of miles, but the supply chain, the policies, and the experience for moving those short 20 or 30 miles just really isn't there yet. And that's where we're hoping to identify areas where this white paper will show us we can improve. So, integrating with ground transport companies moving forward, we think will be a massively interesting thing for the travel management companies and for the travel buyers.
So, and Daniel, this brings up Valia brought up a point again on we were talking about this. When it comes to ground transportation, when you have potentially one of Valia's travelers from her company on the ground, they get off the plane, their travel from the plane to the rental car's out to their location, to the hotel, there hasn't been a duty of care to cover their safety, especially in EMEA and Europe. And as we move into the new things, the safety and duty of care, how are we covering that? And I know, Valia, you had a question back about how do we track the travelers when they check into their cars and they check into their hotels. Is that something that you've been looking at with the ground transportation?
Yeah, no, it really is. So usually a TMC and the travel buyer will know where their traveler is when they board the plane, when they're at the conference, and when they're at the hotel. But if they don't have a ground transport policy in place and they don't have deals in place with local ground transport companies, then they don't know which mode of transport they're using to get between these locations. And Anne, I think in our recent news article, I think you mentioned that is the most exposed part of the journey, right? Because you're using a local operator, a much smaller business, and we put less of a focus on it. We put a huge focus on the Virgin and the Delta and the British Airways, which are multi-million-pound companies, and we put a really small and magnifying glass on a little taxi company that might have 30 or 40 cars, and it doesn't seem the right way around. This is the area where our travelers need our biggest support and our most attention to make sure that we're giving them options that are safe for them to travel. So that's what we're doing. That's our role from a ground transport platform point of view. But we need the support from the travel management companies to provide this technology to the travel buyers.
Okay, great, thank you. And this we do have a question going back from the audience on vaccinations or not, and I'm going to address this to Beth. And his question is doesn't HIPAA laws restrict companies and countries from sharing whether you did or did not get vaccinated? Won't it simply have to break it down to purely volunteer basis? How would you address that, Beth?
I mean, I think the answer is 100%. The permission and authorization must come based on our HIPAA laws and then the GDPR regulations. It must come from the individual. And I think that this is one of the challenges that companies are facing, to the conversation we had before about whether you can require vaccinations and things of that nature. So it becomes very, a little complicated, because we put the ownership of our medical information. It is owned by you, and you are the only one who really has the authority and ability to share it, unless you give permission to somebody else to share it. And so that's kind of what's also raised the awareness of the importance of people taking ownership of their information, because we've seen with COVID and whatever, other experiences we have, that this is all in our hands, and it is 100% against, it violates all of the HIPAA rules for at this point in time, for any company or organization to force you to provide them any of that information or to share it on your behalf. So this is one of the things that, brings some messiness or, complications into the current situation.
Thank you, Beth. And I want to thank all of our panelists. We got some really deep dive answers and real time information that has been very, very useful. And I think that Our next panel is really going to focus on APAC and India. I know that we started our conversations, Valia, before this, Valia and Mike were talking about India and some of the things that are going to happen with India. So there is a need to focus on that travel. But I want to thank everybody on the panel and everybody in the audience. If you have further questions you'd like, we will send out a survey and you can have sort of Q&A. And I know everybody here is happy to answer any questions. Thank you again. You guys, this was amazing. And we will see you at our next panel. Travel is Not Done 3 APAC in the US and everywhere, global, it's still global. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ann.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.